Ms. Vander, Mr. Willie, Mr. Matthews, Mr. Davis, Mr. Derry, Mr. Mackey. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Would everybody please stand for the invocation by Mr. Salmons and a pledge by Mr. Matthews?
Our dear Father, thank you for bringing us together tonight safely. Please guide, guard, and direct us as we make the decisions for the parish tonight. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Have the commissioners had an opportunity to look at the January 10th minutes? Are there any corrections or changes?
Yeah, I went through them with the secretary. There was a couple of minor ones, and I make the motion to approve.
And the secretary will change those low minor?
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion. I have a second by Mr. Doherty. Please vote on that motion. Wait 1 minute, fellas. You gotta put it on the view.
It's all written. Are y'all not on?
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It worked fine. Mr. Keller, are there any items that are asking to be tabled or withdrawn?
No, sir.
Okay. On the consent calendar, are there any items that any of the commissioners would like to pull, or are there any items that the public would like to discuss? On the consent calendar only.
There's one item on the consent calendar, the number 1, the entering the parish right away.
Okay, we're gonna pull entering the parish right-of-way resolution number 11-009, Ward 4 and 6, District 6 and 7, the amount of $130,000. It expires on March 10th of 2012. The debtor is Tri-State Natural Gas Pipeline, and it's in Mr. Tanner's district and Mr. Gorby's district. All in favor of pulling that item?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? All right. You
So
want to?
remainder of the calendar, you want to approve it now?
Yeah, let's go
I
ahead.
move to approve the remainder of the
Remaining
calendar.
calendar, okay. I got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote on that motion.
Oh,
We
Alright.
mine on
You're
electronics.
good now? Should be good.
We all, what?
Try it. Try it now.
Yeah,
try
it's
yours.
working.
Okay, that should work.
Motion carries. Staff, on the first item, enter the parish right-of-way. Any comments?
The above referenced performance obligation expires March 10th, 2012, and is scheduled for review by the Planning Commission at the February 14th, 2012 meeting. Work covered by this obligation has not been accomplished. The following uncompleted items exist. Install pipeline under parish roads, furnish as-built drawings at each crossing. The performance obligation was established by the Planning Commission on February 8th, 2011, and furnished by the petitioner on September 10th, 2011. That's a correction. It was a typo on the original date. The developer or petitioner will be advised that he will be required to conform with all current ordinances when applicable as a condition of this extension. The petitioner has been notified by the Department of Engineering on January 25th, 2012 to submit a letter explaining why an extension of time is needed for this obligation. See attached letter. Therefore, it is recommended that the performance obligation be extended for a period of 6 months or until the work is satisfactorily completed. Letter from Tri-State came back in form of an email saying, as per our conversation today, please accept this as Tri-State NGL Pipeline LLC's letter explaining why an extension of time is needed. The reason for the extension is simply due to the project not being completed at this time. Please include this in the agenda package for the February 14th, 2012 meeting.
Mr. Matthews.
Well, first of all, I'm glad we did send a letter to them in January 25th, asking them to explain why an extension was needed. I think we probably need to revise this letter a little bit, rather than asking them why an extension is needed, to be asking them why they have not completed the project, because it's clear they need an extension because the project is not completed. And their response is, although technically they are answering the letter, they're not telling us anything. I'd like to see them get another letter asking them to tell us why the project is not complete, not why they need an extension of time. Can we carry this over to the March meeting, or what can we do with this?
Why don't you just extend it like we normally do for 6 months and then let them answer it in the meantime? I don't imagine you're gonna pull a letter of credit, are you?
No, obviously, we can't do that for the obvious reasons, but can we ask them to come to the March meeting or submit something to the March meeting? Or are our hands tied on this?
I don't know why it makes much of a difference.
Well, you do have to extend it. We can't call it, but you could request that the letter be sent and the explanation be given, and you could entertain that response, if you will. You could listen to that response at the next meeting, assuming they respond timely.
Well, that's what we need to do, I guess. I move that we send them a letter asking them to respond at the next meeting.
You wanna clarify that for staff so they know what you wanna ask them?
I think I kind of did, that we need to revise that letter.
Probably,
Tell them-
Mr. Matthews, shouldn't we ask for a timeline of what they're going to do to complete the project?
I'd love something, anything,
Yeah.
rather than this kind of cryptic note that we got back from them.
Send them a letter asking them why it's taking so long and what's their time frame for completing this project. You know, there's some problems that's out of their control, or is it within our control to help them? Okay, I have a motion.
I second.
I have a second. Any other discussion? Please vote on the motion. Motion carries. Okay, revocations, closing, and reviews. Revocation 12
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do we need to go ahead and pass the entire consent calendar?
We did that.
We did?
We did that
Okay,
before
I
we
guess I
had
was sleeping.
discussion.
All right, thank you.
Revocation 12-02-002. It's a revocation of a portion of 19th Avenue and East Street, Ward 3, District 5. The applicants are Mikado and Rigagor LLC. The survey is Galfano Engineering, and it's in Mr. Gould's district. Any opposition? Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This property is owned by a developer who wants to revoke a portion of these two streets, which is 19th Avenue and East Street. He wishes to purchase the properties, which he owns on all sides, in order to assimilate said streets into his surrounding property to be utilized for commercial application. The staff has reviewed the applicant's request and believes the proposal is consistent relative to the Louisiana revised statutes governing the revocation of movable property, since the right-of-way does not appear to serve any public use or benefit other than to the applicant. Therefore, the staff has no objections to the proposed revocation request.
Mr. Scalfano, any comments on this?
No, we're here to answer any questions. The developer's here to answer questions.
Okay.
I'm available to answer questions if anybody has any.
Let's see if there's any questions. Ms. Casabon.
And this is, appears to be a relevant request. I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve.
I have some
I don't have a
questions
second
first.
on it.
I'll second it, but
Okay.
I got this question.
Okay, I have a second. Any discussion? Mr. Willie?
Mr. Scalvano? That portion of, you said it's surrounded by all sides, but Square 194, the property owner on that square?
Yes, he does. Up to the back of the Times Picayune, but yes, he does.
So he owns Square 194 as well, and the
Yes.
square to the, I guess, west of there?
Yes, sir.
I don't see a
Yes.
number on there.
Well, yeah, well, there's no square number there. That was, if you look at the Alexisville map.
Where I'm saying he owns that square where I see Eddie Terrell Nissan right here. Does he own this one?
No, I'm sorry. He doesn't own J. That's Eddie Terrell, Nissan.
Okay, my concern was like if, is all of D Street revoked already?
Yes, sir. They were done in 1930. Most of
Okay,
ED
then
and all that was
if all of
revoked.
these revoked, then I don't have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Matthews.
Not 19th, well, let me clarify, not 19th Avenue up to this point. From Highway 190 to 19th is still public right-of-way. We're just taking that last 260 feet of 19th.
Okay, my concern was if all of D Street wasn't, revoked, then that turn, you know, where it goes 19th to D Street, that corner there, that turn would be very narrow there.
No,
if
they're-
that
they're-
is still an open street.
They're revoked, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just that there have been some questions on this, and I got some other questions on it, but the councilman in this district has some questions, and he had asked me to table this at this meeting, and therefore I moved to table.
I've already-
Had a motion to approve.
No, the tabling motion supersedes.
Supersedes.
All right, I have a
Well,
motion.
could I answer
to
any
table and
questions?
I have a second. No discussion right now. Let's discuss
Motion
that now.
table.
Please vote on the tabling. Motion carries 6-3. It's tabled. 5-3. My vote goes to the prevailing side, which would make it 6-3. So, I don't know what to tell you unless Mr. Matthews wants to give you some guidance.
The councilman has asked to talk to you all about this, and I'm sure if you get in touch with him, he'll help you work through it.
All right. Thank you.
Tentative subdivision review, SD 11-11-005, Coquille Phase 2 revised, Ward 1, District 1. The developer and the owner is Forest Lake Estates LLC. The engineer is Kelly McHugh and Associates, and it's in Mr. Dean's district. Any opposition? Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope everybody kept their plats from the last several meetings. This has been tabled on the agenda for the last 2 to 3 meetings. This is a proposed revised edition of Coquille Phase 2. If you look at your tentative plat, it's basically the one that's in the middle. The top phase that's on Highway 22 is Phase 1. The one to the far western end is future phase, which will probably be Phase 3. The one in the middle that is designated as lots G22 through G32, and then G52 through G58. That's the phase that they're asking for approval on tonight. There's a total of 18 lots, the typical lot size, garden-type homes, building sites of 45 by 65. It is a planned unit development. The developer is requesting that the detention for his phase be waived in favor of making impact fee payments in lieu thereof pursuant to Parish Code. Comment 2, dead-end streets are prohibited by code. Therefore, the developer is providing a 60 by 60 temporary turnaround at the terminus of Christian Lane. This should also be subject to a guarantee from the developer in written form that he will dedicate or provide the land necessary to construct a permanent cul-de-sac at the end of said street to parish standards if in the event the developer does not continue within 2 years after receiving preliminary subdivision approval. Furthermore, the developer should provide a performance obligation in the amount of $5,000 for 2 years in conjunction with the preliminary subdivision approval process in order to cover the construction costs associated with a permanent cul-de-sac in the event that the developer does not fulfill his obligations. Comment 3, a preliminary draft copy of the declaration of covenant restrictions was submitted to staff as required. However, said restrictions and covenants are relative to Phase 1 and not to 2. Therefore, we assume the developer intends to apply same to said restrictions to Phase 2. The developer needs to clarify this matter and remit the appropriate documentation for Phase 2. The staff recommends approval, subject to the developer complying with all staff comments. And engineering will have their comments at the preliminary review.
Ron, let me ask you a question before you start. I read off tentative subdivision review. This is tentative we're looking at, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Engineering, any comments?
Engineering comments are same as preliminary. If you want me to read them, I will.
May as well, we're gonna review it all, we'll just vote on it separately afterwards. I would imagine all the questions are gonna come together.
Do we
The
need to
preliminary-
make, I'm sorry, do we need to make a motion to hear
No,
them?
we'll just hear them separately.
Okay, then. I'm sorry.
The preliminary plans have been reviewed by this office and inspections made of the site. It is recommended that preliminary submittal be approved subject to the following. The developer's engineers request a waiver of the on-site detention requirement. The Department of Engineering has reviewed the request and determined that there will be no negative effect within the basin of the waiver, and therefore accept the waiver of detention requirement. The waiver must be approved by the Planning Commission. Should the Planning Commission approve the waiver, the assessed drainage fee will amount to $8,985, which is due before a work order is issued. Need a hydrological study showing culvert calculations. No maintenance obligation is required since this is an extension of a private subdivision. Mandatory developmental fees will be required at final submittal in accordance with Ordinance 499 since no public hearing was held prior to January 1st, 2005.
Yes, sir, you are.
Stephen Chan with Kelly McCune Associates.
Anything to add to that?
Don't believe,
Let me
requesting tentative.
see what the commissioners have for you. Mr. Davis.
Steve,
Yes,
I believe going well with the, I'm a little concerned about not having any of the retention ponds, but obviously in flood zone C, and the engineering said it would be okay. I do have one little problem with one location. If you look at lots G23, 24, 25, and 26 and 27, they all flow into the direction of where you have G22.
okay, say again.
If you look at lots G23 through 27, the rear of those properties all flow towards G22, which is a lot which I assume is going to be come off Coquille Drive.
Yes, there's an existing ditch that goes through that area.
Right.
All that will be routed through. None of that's gonna reach G22.
I mean, is that a good idea, especially since there is no retention? I mean, if I were to think, if, I see the ditch is behind G22, correct?
Correct.
If I would believe that since there is no need for retention, which I agree, but if you're having a massive rainflow and it's all draining past this G22, which lays there horizontally, is there a need for that lot there at all? I mean, realistically, I know you're trying to fill up space, but I don't see a need for that.
Well, we've sized everything to accommodate all the flows. It's not gonna back up in that area.
So these lots, these they're patio homes, correct?
Correct, garden homes.
So these garden homes, these four are gonna look directly in the backyard and see this other home, is that correct?
Yes, somewhat.
I don't like the design. I mean, as far as the plan goes, it doesn't seem like a good plan to me, just because of that one lot. That's just my opinion on it.
Okay.
Mr. Matthews.
Well, I'm not sure I completely understand. The water from those other lots are going to flow across, what is it, 22?
No, there's an existing.
What's to stop it? What's to stop the water from 23 through 27 flowing across 22?
There's an existing ditch that crosses between G22 and G12. All this is gonna be subsurface drainage. We're gonna have one pipe that
But
routes.
that's behind G22.
Correct.
So but the water from lot 25 is gonna flow in the direction of 22, across 22 to get into that ditch? No?
No, we're gonna grade everything to the street, to
Well,
Christian
you've got
Court.
the arrows on here, I think, don't you? Indicating that that flow is from 25 across 22 into that existing ditch.
Yeah, some of that. That's gonna be insignificant amount of flows.
This is 14 feet. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna flow from 14 feet down to 13 feet, so it's gonna be heading to the north.
I don't see how you figure that's gonna be an insignificant amount of flow, and you're gonna be dumping from all 5 of those lots, basically on one lot. If I had lot 22, I'm not sure I'd think that was insignificant.
If I'm reading this, this map with the arrows on it, it's showing the flow. They're engineers, and they know which way it's going to flood. They know they couldn't sell that lot, G22, if it's going to flood. So the arrows, if I'm not mistaken, shows which way they go and where it goes, correct?
Correct.
All those
That
must go
those-
to the front.
That we're not here to redesign this, is to say, and I'm
Yes,
not.
we
an
are
engi-
here to redesign it.
No,
That's
we're
part of the
not
planning commission.
engineers. If the engineer shows me the arrows and where it's going, and there's a big ditch back there, I don't think that they would put a lot that, I'm not an engineer to know, so that's why I have to trust them to say, they're gonna tell me, we just asked him, is G22 going to flood? And there's a big ditch, and then it shows where the water's going and the subsurface and the way it drains down the street, where it will go.
There's an awful lot of lots in this parish that somebody said they weren't going to flood, and they do.
Then
I
this,
have a lot
this
directly
developer
behind my
would
house.
be responsible for it,
Look,
to go
look,
back
wait,
in.
Wait, time out, time out.
We're supposed to have questions, I believe. That's what we're here for.
Bill, Martha, hold up a minute, please. Paul, give us your take on it. You're the engineer.
Okay, it can be made to work, and we have lot drainage inspections to verify that things are graded properly at the time they construct the lot.
So you don't see an issue with it?
I don't see a problem.
Okay. Mr. Mackey. Oh, hold up. Mr. Matthews, anything else?
Still got one more thing. You're convinced that there is no need for detention. Can you give me a simple explanation why you say that?
Okay, the reason we're willing to approve the waiver for retention is because all of the discharge in that phase of the subdivision drains into marshland. There's no body below them to be affected.
Okay. That explains it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mackey.
I'm also looking at the flows, and lots 8 and 9, which is not exactly into this area, but there are no directions which way it flows other than looking at the elevation 14 to 13. So I assume that it's flowing in that direction, which is going to go into, what's that thing north of 13?
That's phase one, though.
I know, but there's nothing into that. Anyway, that plus, what about the flow directions? I guess that's a different phase, around 30, 33, 34, 35, that's the next phase,
Correct,
huh?
that's the
3?
future phase.
Okay, so, all right, as far as, this is for staff, as far as the, now this is preliminary talk, but they're supposed to, according to your wishes, and I sympathize with that, to make a drainage calculation with the culverts to see that we're not getting backed up and stuff. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah, as far as the roadside culverts, that's gonna be a comment in the preliminary, and I discussed it with Steve before the meeting. He's gonna get that to me shortly. He's already got it done. I just need to see it.
Okay, and when they do that, you check assumptions in these calculations, because I know sometimes assumptions can be incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, how much impervious they're assuming, all the runoff coefficients, slope, all that went into the
Yeah, 'cause
calculation
slope
to
is
make sure
one you
everything's
can-
appropriately assumed.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Davis.
Yes, I do like the design, though, I really do, except for that one lot, because everything looks like it has enough separation, everything can flow well, and so, my kudos to you for that, because it does look good. So, from our point of view, it's not just the drainage we're looking at, but of course, as far as planning commissioners go, we look at it aesthetically as well. Since the,
Just to give you some guidance, you don't have to approve it if you don't like it.
no, I understand,
I'm just
I'm
telling
just saying, though, in essence, since the floodplain, the floodplain matches and everything, realistically, you could build another lot above it. Why not build another lot right there next to it, right? So you understand from our point of view too,
I can appreciate your concern. I can assure you, we've taken all this into consideration. This property is in flood zone C.
Right.
It's no flooding, and we have looked at all the drainage in the area and off-site, and we've accommodated everything. Believe me, the developer does not want anything flooding, any drainage problems.
But you understand that we've
I
seen
can
this happen
understand,
before.
I can appreciate your concern.
Has this been plugged into the model, into our drainage model, this particular area?
No, this area right here, basically sheet
It's-
flows into the
Okay.
marsh. There's
So it's not
nothing really
necessarily
modeled.
into our
Yeah.
drainage model, okay. If you felt like there was a need, it would be put in, okay.
Mr. Sammons?
Yeah, I noticed on the map that you got a 50-foot radius circle for the turnaround. Is that supposed to be 60? Or if that's a question for staff?
I don't know the details on that. Rebecca reviews the traffic. Steve, do you have any explanation?
I think that's a minimum requirement just for just a temporary turnaround. This
Oh,
is temporary.
temporary?
It is
Okay.
temporary.
With that, I motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve. I have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote on the motion. This is for tentative.
Steve, what's your last name?
Chandler.
Motion carries. Preliminary subdivision review, SD 11-11-005, Phase 2, Coquille, Phase 2 revised, Ward 1, District 1. The developer and the owner is Forest Lake Estates LLC. The engineer is Kelly McEwen Associates, and it's in Mr. Dean's district. Any opposition? Staff, your comments.
Engineering, same as tentative. The preliminary plan's been reviewed by this office and inspections made of the site. It is recommended that preliminary submittal be approved subject to the following. The developer's engineer has requested a waiver of the on-site detention requirements. The Department of Engineering has reviewed this request and determined that there will be no negative effect within the basin of the waiver, and therefore accept the waiver of detention requirement. The waiver must be approved by the Planning Commission. Should the Planning Commission approve the waiver, the assessed drainage fee will be in the amount of $8,985, which is due before work order is issued. Need a hydrologic study showing culvert calculations. No maintenance obligations required since this is an extension of a private subdivision. Mandatory developmental fees will be required at final submittal in accordance with Ordinance 499, since no public hearing was held prior to January 1st, 2005. Department of Planning, comments are same as in tentative. Department of Environmental Services has comments.
Plans and specifications for the construction of the project's water distribution lines and sewage collection lines have not yet been approved by the Department of Health and Hospitals as required. Staff recommends approval and no work order will be issued until the submitted plans and specifications have been approved by DHH.
Okay. Anything to add, Steve? Let me get some questions for you then.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I think we asked most of the questions in the tentative
Right.
side. Move to approve.
I have a motion. I have a second by Mr. Sammons. Please vote. Yeah. Please vote on the motion. Motion carries 8-1. We got to have a motion to reconsider tentative because of the fact that I didn't register my vote, and we need to register my vote in order for the waiver to be effective. So I'll ask somebody to reconsider.
Motion to reconsider.
I have a motion, I have a second, and reconsider tentative subdivision review SD 11-11-005 for the purpose of getting the votes for the waiver, and please vote on that with the waiver on tentative.
Move for the waiver. Don't we need to make a motion for the waiver?
Yeah,
Or is this a motion to reconsider?
this is a motion to reconsider.
Okay.
That motion carries. Now we'll have to reconsider the motion for the waiver, and if somebody...
Motion to approve with the waiver of the detention.
What if I make a motion to approve the waiver, but don't make the motion to approve the tentative?
That's up to you.
Thank you.
All you gotta do is deny the motion. It's not, the motion is to reconsider the whole thing. Okay. Vote on the motion.
I thought we did.
Motion carries. Proposed amendments to ordinance 499,
Thank
an
you, Steph.
ordinance to amend the St. Tammany Parish Code of Ordinance Appendix B, Chapter 40 of Subdivision Regulatory Ordinance Number 499 Section 40-074.01, Parish enforced subdivision restrictions and/or covenants relative prohibiting rear access to lots within an approved subdivision. Staff or legal?
Mr. Chairman, the purpose of having this amendment placed in the subdivision ordinance is primarily one, to give notice. Just to give you a little history of the necessity for this amendment as it relates to the Dove Park subdivision. And back in January 21st of 1954, Ordinance 181, which is the original subdivision ordinance, was adopted by the police jury, setting forth certain requirements for subdivisions to be approved. That original ordinance was subsequently amended on March 4th of 1954, and then again on December 20th, 1956. The amendment in 1956, on December 20th, amended paragraph 3 to provide subsection D of section 3, which is section 3D1, is amended to read, to promote the health and well-being of the residents, no lot in any subdivision shall be less than 7,500 square feet in area with a minimum of 75 feet front on the setback line. On June 20th of 1957, the Dove Park subdivision plat was approved. That subdivision plat, approved in accordance with the subdivision ordinance as amended in December 1956, required a 75-foot front on the building site. The subdivision plat for Dove Park was recorded in the clerk's office, map number 16A, on the same date as approved, June 20th, 1957, with the following. Note, restriction of minimum building site of 75-foot front. That was in strict accordance with the subdivision regulations that existed at the time that plat was approved, and that restriction was placed on the plat in accordance with that. Because of the time we're talking about, all of the years that have gone by, to ensure that the planning department and the building permit office is aware that this subdivision restriction still exists today, we are amending the subdivision regulation to place in there this new provision that notwithstanding any provision that may conflict with the following requirement, a minimum building site of 75 feet front on the setback line shall be required within the Dove Park subdivision. That makes it consistent with the ordinance and the restrictions that are on that subdivision plat.
Any comments from the public? Mr. Matthews?
Neil, this isn't changing anything, is it? Not really.
No, it's to ensure that if
It's to
any-
clarify and
That's right.
ensure, okay.
It's to ensure that if anybody comes in and asks for a building permit for a building site in Dove Park, that those requirements are adhered to.
I couldn't see a change, but if it's for a clarification, I can, move to approve.
I have a motion, I have a second by Mr. Davis. Any discussion? Please vote on the motion. Motion carries. An ordinance to amend the St. Tammany Parish Code of Ordinances, Appendix B, Chapter 40 of Subdivision Regulatory Ordinance Number 499, Section 40-034.01, Contiguous Lot Rule, relative to requiring a minimum of 75-foot frontage building sites in Dove Park subdivision. Mr. Hall. The Contiguous Lot Rule Ordinance
Yeah, but not in Dove Park.
in Dove Park.
That's a typo. I think that's a typo.
Okay.
You got them mixed up. The first one is the one you need to deal with, yeah.
They're just written
That's just a,
incorrectly.
yeah. it's a-
Typo.
It's a typo in reference to Dove Park. That was
Okay.
the first ordinance that we just talked about. The second ordinance pertains to the rear access to lots within an approved subdivision. Basically, what it says is you cannot have access to any street that is not within the boundaries of the approved subdivision. What brought this about is we have a subdivision that has approved streets where the homes face those streets. The rear of the houses face a public street, and it is a well-traveled street. There has been a couple of occurrences where the owners of a couple of those homes have put in access driveways to the public street that is not part of the subdivision. And it creates a public safety issue with cars turning into those driveways or backing out of them. And in particular, houses that are very near to the intersecting street. So the entire purpose of this is to restrict the use of a public right-of-way that is not within the boundaries of the approved subdivision to avoid having a potential proliferation of driveways onto a public thoroughfare where it could be a very serious traffic safety issue.
Mr. Salmons.
Yeah, Neil, so for those who already have those driveways, is that going to prevent them from using them now, or?
No, we approved those. They are existing, and we can't retroactively go back
Okay.
and take those up. It will only apply to any future driveways that people come into engineering to get approval to put in a driveway.
Okay. Well, I think this is good, and I make a motion to approve.
I have a motion, a second. Any questions, Mr. Matthews?
I just want to say one thing. I've seen more than one occasion where this has occurred, and not only does it cause a traffic problem, it can and has caused drainage problems where they put culverts in the ditches. The culvert's not the right size. It's a mess. This is an excellent ordinance.
Now, this is on any size lot, correct?
It's all about having an approved subdivision.
If you've got a 1 acre subdivision or a 5 acre subdivision, it all applies.
Well, it particularly applies to those subdivisions where you have a right of ingress and egress without using a public road that is not part of that subdivision.
But if it's a public road and it's part of that subdivision, even though it's a 5 or 10 acre tract, you still can't do it.
Well, it doesn't matter what the size of the subdivision is, whether it's 100 homes or whether it's 50. When you approve that final plat, what's important is you're approving a plat with ingress and egress to those streets that are within that plat. To access any other road that's not within that plat is what we're trying to prevent.
But I would imagine, and I'm not trying to make light of the ordinance, but I know, and we've got to have some way to look at some of the bigger subdivisions that we approve that have a public roads. They can get to them, it's a public street, and it comes into the back of their property.
That's gonna be.
exactly what we're trying to prevent.
Well, but the
And I understand.
the
when you-
roads within the subdivision are gonna be how you access the property. The subdivision will have an access to these larger public roads in the subdivision, the entrance and the exits to the subdivision. And what it's saying is that if you have a subdivision that has public roads within it and an access to the larger public road, you cannot build a second access to your property. Is that right or wrong? But that's what this is saying, and I think it's a good
I understand
idea.
what it's saying, but what I'm trying to tell you is that you're gonna be faced with the dilemma of people that have 5, 3, 7, 10 acres up in the country areas, that their property goes from street to street, both public streets, and they want to access it 2 ways, to drive through it.
Well, it says they can't.
Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
There's no waiver in this. I mean, I think you should create a waiver to handle that.
Well, also keep in mind that we don't really approve these kind of subdivisions anymore. I mean, that, I think Bluffs came in around the mid-80s in that range. Today, if we look at lots that have double frontage, we try to avoid them if all possible. Staff tries to mitigate that with the developer and say, let's don't do that. If because of the layout, that's the only way they can do it, we require usually a 5-foot no access servitude to stop people from doing that. So that shouldn't be a problem with any newer subdivisions.
I think this ordinance change takes care of itself, because if we're gonna pass a final plat, we're gonna look and see exactly where the entrances are. So if we see something that looks a little irregular,
It's
then,
not so much us looking at it.
right.
It's the owner of the piece of property that wants to drive through his property. It's got enough, there's not that, it's not going on a major highway or anything.
Well, I
I'm
understand that.
telling you, you're gonna run into that, and everybody's gonna be scratching their head and say,
No,
now,
I
now what
understand.
do we do?
I understand that, but I got a neighbor who likes to drive his car on my property. I mean,
Not a
you know,
problem, not a problem. No reason to call a questions. I ended the discussion. Old business. Please vote on the motion. I was trying to get around voting on it.
John made the motion.
Yeah. Motion carries. Old business, SD 05-06-012, Phase 1B, Beatty Cove Creek, Phase 1B, Ward 1, District 1. The developer and the owner is Upland Properties LLC. The engineer is Roselli's Engineering and Consulting LLC, and it's in Mr. Dean's district. And it's a request to approve an act of amendment to amend the final subdivision plat. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you recall, this issue was brought up before you at the zoning level. They're basically coming in under the PUD zoning to amend the setbacks on several of the lots. They made a green space modification, and they created an access maintenance and drainage servitude for the subdivision plat. It's a technical issue. The zoning was taken care of. You approved it. But because these issues are on the final plat, they need to be amended per an act of amendment. So that's what we're here for tonight.
Mr. Burris.
Mr. Lombard, members of the commission, Wayne Burris representing Beatty Cove Creek Preserve. I really don't have much to add to Mr. Keller's comments. I was here in December, and we thoroughly discussed all the issues, and we'd ask approval of now the Planning Commission.
Ms. Casabon.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? I got a question, Wayne.
Yes, sir.
What are we gonna do at the golf course that's supposed to be out there?
Golf course is right there. It's a recreation area. There actually are, from what I understand, I hadn't been out there, but I understand there are a couple of greens that have been sort of manicured, but the economics of it just really don't work to build a golf course out there. But
Ask
the
people at
envelope
Colonial.
is there and intact.
Ask the people at Colonial Country Club about the golf course.
I was just curious if there was any plans. I know it's economic hardship and they're not self-supporting golf courses.
Right.
All right, please vote on the motion. Motion carries.
Thank you all. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Any other old business? Any new business? Yes, sir. Oh, all right. So
Mr.
moved.
Simon.
Mr. Salmons?
Sayonara.
I know. The last-
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you, Ms. Vander, too, for your time here on the Planning and Zoning Commission, too, as well. And Mr. Sammons.
I told him at the zoning meeting. All right?
Then he'll play golf 3 days